And no real managerial changes this week to talk about. So we're going to go straight into it. We're going to start in the Premier League, another Premier League manager. And this time it's Jose Mourinho. Now, Jose Mourinho, of course, I mean, what hasn't already been said about him in the media? We know plenty about his managerial style. We know all his self-proclaimed nicknames as well. But bit of a strange old season at Spurs this time, Mike. It kind of feels like they've been pushed to their limits, and now things are starting to just tail off a little.
Yeah, that's certainly my take on it. I think that, I think at the beginning of this season, I think Jose Mourinho expected to compete for the title. I think he saw a strange season panning out in front of him. And I think he's still got utter belief in himself to be able to, if Tottenham were capable of winning the league title this season, he would get those standards out of them. But it's evident that they weren't capable. And I think in the first half of the season, he was driving, I guess you can make the parallel with it, a top racing driver in a car that's just not meant to win a Formula One championship. That's, I guess, a comparison you could make with Tottenham. They're just not of that level. But Jose Mourinho, I believe, has pushed them to those limits in the first half of the season. And they should have been going into the Christmas period with a lead of, opening up a points gap. If you think of the 3, 4, 5 leads that they let slip in the first half of the season. And I think that was their opportunity, while the teams that were coming back late from European football last season were still trying to acclimatise to, what were clearly going to be new conditions and not necessarily suiting all of the elite players and things like that. And I just think we've kind of reached a point now where Tottenham this season is just completely gone to pot as a campaign. But I think Mourinho, the documentary itself is All or Nothing. Is that's the name of the Amazon Prime documentary. And I think it literally was all or nothing for Mourinho. It was title or bust was the way he attacked this season. So it's possibly not necessarily a surprise to see them drop back to 7th, 8th in the table. And, they have tailed off. It's going to be a season to forget in the end. They've just got this Carabao Cup final next weekend now to potentially salvage something from it.
We know plenty about Mourinho's coaching capabilities, and I guess he probably hasn't as much time on the training ground as he would have liked, Mike, because you've got all these fixtures stacking up. You've got a shorter than usual season anyway, and then you've got the Europa League, and in those small gaps that they have had this season, all the players are jetting off on international duty because that hasn't been curtailed despite the backup of fixtures. So I guess next season he may be able to just get his head down and work on things on the training ground a little bit more and have a bit of breathing space. Do you think that will help?
Well, it'll be interesting to see if he's still there, to be quite honest, because you see how these things tend to brew, and there's already questions about his future at the club. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily been easy for anyone, but I was sweet on Tottenham at the beginning of the season, actually backed them for the title, believing that Mourinho would be looking to get those standards out of them. And I think he's a big logistics man. And I think what is good about Mourinho is that he takes the resources that he's got. He takes the time available that he's got. And I think, we've seen him before cobbled together within the space of 2 or 3 days when it's a big game comes up or you get 2 big matches back to back. We see now with Pep Guardiola at Manchester City how difficult it is to manage big games on top of each other. I think Mourinho in his prime, that was one of the things he was great at, partly because the style of football he plays is as much about restricting the opposition and stopping the opposition from doing what they want to do. But, he's always been capable of, and I think Tottenham's style this season, very much a counter-attacking approach. That's being thrown at them now. It's being thrown at Mourinho. It's been thrown at Tottenham. How can you be so limited at this stage? But I think he's looked ahead at the season ahead. He's looked at the schedule, the type of season that it is, the logistics, and just thought, well, why do we need to go out expending all this energy when we can have a game plan that relies very heavily on Son and Kane at the top end of the pitch, very defensive, very counter-attacking, and about springing teams on the counter, inviting teams onto us, and we saw early in the season there were occasions where Tottenham were very, very good at what it was they did, very one-dimensional in the sense that they didn't play in a variety of ways and didn't have that in the locker, but. It's that was Mourinho's way of dealing with these conditions and dealing with this particular season. I still think he's one of the best managers out there, if not the best still to this day, at the logistical side, at seeing what you've got, working to the strengths of the particular players you inherit, or the strengths and weaknesses of your squad, looking at the opposition, analysing them in depth, and then saying, right, these are the threats we need to reduce. These are the areas we need to expose. This is what we need to do in this particular game. Here's the plan, literally to the finest detail instruction for every single player. Now go and do it. And I think this season that's been very limited in terms of, it is just very one-dimensional what he's done, but it's tailored to the season. And I don't think there's anyone better than Mourinho to manage a schedule, shall we say. And this is the schedule he's been dealt. He's gone all out for the title at the beginning, and this is what we see now at the back end of the season, that he's getting nowhere near where he wanted at the beginning of the season.
If he is given, I guess, the stay of execution and gets to manage Spurs next season, it won't be without demands on his side, will it? It won't entirely be a one-sided decision. If he goes into talks and negotiations about what happens next season, Mourinho is going to demand big changes in that playing squad. Certainly more depth, I think, for starters, but there are lots of positions in that squad that clearly need A, filling with quality, and B, backing up. And that is going to be, I think, a bone of contention over the summer, isn't it? But Mourinho needs plenty of support, doesn't he, from owners wherever he is. He doesn't. You get the asset that is Mourinho, but you do kind of have to spend a little.
Yeah, and I think this. I mean, you could go back to the Formula One car analogy again. He's pushed it to its very limits, to breaking point. So now it's exposed everything that needs. Here's how far away you are from a title-winning team. Here's the parts that you need. Here's what you need to fix. If you want this to be the whole thing to be running like a well-oiled machine, well, you need to replace all these parts. And there's no point dallying. This is the way that Mourinho sees it, I believe. There's no point dallying in half measures. I'm going to push this thing to its limits and see how far we can take it, see where the weak spots are, what needs to be replaced. And then it's up to the club. They can happily pay me off on a £15 million a year contract. I found out what I wanted to find out and what I was capable of at this club. But I'm not just going to dance around and spend 4 years doing nothing, not finding out the answers I want to find out, and just seeing how far I can take this. And we've seen this in his previous jobs, that, he does take things to breaking point very, very quickly. And even when he's had success, we talk about his second season being his big season. That would have been this season with Tottenham, in his previous jobs. But then the third season, things tend to go wrong. I think now he's kind of mellowed a bit in his old age, and it's possibly playing out over a slower timeline. But at the same time, he's not gone into the biggest club in the country for a start. But at the same time, he's not going to hold back on seeing what a team is capable of, and really just demanding elite standards from players who aren't necessarily elite players all the way across the team. So he's found out all his answers now. And if he goes into them talks in the summer, I would assume he will be demanding a war chest, or at least saying to Tottenham, listen, if you want me to do what I'm good at and you want a real title charge, we're going to need this, and this. And it might be quite a long shopping list.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about the mellowing and the changes that we've seen in Mourinho. He's a very, very different, certainly a different man in terms of his post-match and his pre-match interviews. And, he's certainly not as fiery, but that is not at the expense of passion, which he obviously has for winning. But he also just appears more at ease with himself, doesn't he, now? And almost like he's got this body of work. He knows what he's capable. And if it all goes wrong, he knows there's probably another job around the corner.
Yeah, I think there's an acceptance now in recent years, possibly during the United job, but certainly after the United job, that a couple of things really, that, his legacy is secure in terms of what he did at the beginning of his career. He's not the main man anymore. He's not the special one. There's Pep Guardiola, there's Jurgen Klopp, there's other managers now who are a bigger deal than Jose Mourinho. I think he's come to accept that. And millennial footballers, that he doesn't connect with this generation like he connected with the previous generation. And I think rather than, we talk about pushing things to the limits, I think he's pushed those relationships to the limits in the past. What he's pushing to the limits now is the capability of the players. And he's not necessarily just destroying those relationships straight away. As soon as he thinks I think he's holding space for players of a different generation. And understanding that I don't really get these players, I'm never going to build the bonds with them that I used to build with the likes of John Terry and, other players that he's had at Inter Milan and his previous clubs. So he's kind of taken more of a step back, and he's kind of stepped into his Instagram dad type. He's got this persona now that he's this cringy dad on Instagram, and there's these little changes, subtle changes that you've seen in the past 4 or 5 years that you think, yeah, he's mellowed. He understands now, the way that life has moved on, cycles have moved on. It's a different world now, but he's still got his own place in it, and it's still as demanding on the football front, but possibly less. There's probably less conflict there at Tottenham. I think there could have been a lot more. Some of the fires he started at Manchester United, for example, and we go back to the physio at Chelsea, Eva Canero. I think that might have had a big impact on him. The way that came across, probably when he looked afterwards and just thought, is that the way I want to look to the outside world? That kind of person. Maybe something like that's had an influence on him. I think he's never afraid to say to the media what he really thinks about a player. It might be disguised, it might be guarded. He might not say exactly what he means, but know that you get the gist. But I don't think he's as confrontational for the sake of confrontation. He's not afraid of confrontation if it needs to be had, and a player needs to be told you're not good enough or you're not doing your job. He's not afraid of it, but I think previously he might have gone looking to start fires and really be the alpha male around a club. And I think nowadays he's just more chilled. He's a bit more laid back. Still the same guy. I think he's just stepped into a new role and more of a granddad figure rather than a father figure these days.
What is it then about millennials that he doesn't seem to connect with? I mean, there are obviously several aspects, and a huge age difference, but there are managers, and we've spoken about them previously. David Moyes was one who we covered on last week's podcast, and he does seem to be able to connect with players who are 18, 19, 20. What is it that Jose Mourinho struggles with? Is it the way he motivates them? Is it that they need more of an arm around the shoulder rather than a chastising or a telling off? Is it something to do with that, or is it the lifestyle, or is it a mixture of both?
I think first and foremost, let's say make the direct comparison between Moyes and Mourinho. Mourinho's a controlling manager. And the modern day footballer is individuality. It's all about individuality. It's all, modern day footballers are businesses of one person. They're a brand. They're all of these kinds of things. They're an individual brand, an individual business. And, it's all about furthering their own careers, ultimately. Whereas Jose Mourinho's managerial style is about sacrifice. It's about the job. It's about getting the job done any which way that it needs to be done to get results. And I just don't think the two things marry from time to time. I think there's situations that have become increasingly common over his managerial career, that these two things don't go side by side and can't sit side by side. Players' egos and players' brands suffer at the hands of a Mourinho team. And I think the past generation, which is, my generation, absolutely. In terms of football, when I think of football and players of my age being footballers, I think of, people wanted to buy into a cause. You wanted to be part of something bigger than yourself. You wanted to be part of this team. And I think that's what everybody bought into with Jose Mourinho. I guess the best example for anyone in English shows is that he's his first Chelsea side. They were so tight-knit, so in such a short space of time, and included a lot of foreign players as well. It wasn't just English players, it wasn't just John Terry and Frank Lampard. He made that the core of his team because he understood that that's where the culture began. But, he brought together players and literally overnight would create this culture, this tight-knit culture. Everybody sacrificed for each other. It was about results. It wasn't about, no individual ever came first ahead of results. And I think over time, more and more, the modern day footballer, that approach doesn't work. I think he's come to understand that. So, he has taken a step back in some of the regards, but in the tactical sense, I still think he's one of the best out there in logistically solving problems. He just doesn't get the same level of buy-in that he used to.
So does he need to perhaps learn how, and it's obviously, when a manager who's won so much and has been so successful, it almost seems ridiculous to suggest what he might need to do and what we might need to improve on. But I'm going to go for it anyway, Mike. Does he need to be better at motivating those individual players and concentrating on those, as opposed to motivating the team and the collective And if he can get his best younger players fired up in some way, then that'll have a positive knock-on effect on the team.
I think he will have tried in some respects, but I think also this does come down to personality, and I just don't think you can change what your flow state is. And his flow state is about getting results. It's about it's about what works in a logical sense. It's not, it's very much a blind spot for him to care for people's emotions to the degree that most other people would. There is an understanding. He can empathise with players, but he struggles to sympathise with them. So he can kind of put himself in their shoes and understand what's probably going on for them. But he'll never understand how much they're hurting because he's just driven. He doesn't hurt the same way that other people hurt. He's just onto the, he doesn't suffer the way that, lesser steeled individuals do suffer. So I think that's kind of the thing that's going on. I think one of the things is with Jose Mourinho is he's studied so much outside of football as well as in football. I think he understands so many mental models, so many different things. I can't believe for a second that he hasn't tried to connect with the modern day football, and I'm sure he's changed in a lot of ways, but it's never going to be a flow state for him. It's never going to be his genius. It's never going to be to make sacrifices for the group to accommodate an individual. It just will never be his style. And so I think he's come to accept that possibly, and come to accept that for me to be at my best, I've got to potentially understand that, my methods are not going to get the results that Pep Guardiola gets, for example, or that Jurgen Klopp might be getting, because my skill set's a different skill set.
Going back to his time at Manchester United, I mean, the amount of articles and features and bits and bobs that I read about him living in a hotel while he was managing the club, quite frankly, I had had enough of it at the time, but I'm going to go back and reflect on it. What does that kind of tell you about his level of commitment to that job? Because if I was a player at Manchester United, I'd be sort of thinking, well, is this guy not staying? Is he not putting down some roots? Is he not here for the long term? Do you think that sent the wrong message out to the players?
Possibly. I think though, ultimately to Mourinho, it is just a job, and it always will just be a job. And that's not to say that clearly the passion is there, and that there's a certain level of drive within him that it doesn't, in fact, if anything, you could argue that the reason he's staying in a hotel anyway is he's living the job. So why do you want a nice fancy house in Cheshire somewhere when you're only going to be having downtime for 2 or 3 hours a day and then going to sleep? You're literally working round the clock to achieve the best results that you can possibly achieve. So, I'm not really sure how that, how relevant that necessarily was to the job that he can do, other than the fact of I think the bigger thing is how the game has changed and how it's moved away from his managerial style at the elite level. I still think, obviously it goes without saying that you put Jose Mourinho in a lower league, but if you put him in a more competitive league and at a level where you haven't got such disparity of wages and player level, wage budgets and things like that, I think generally speaking, Jose Mourinho in a competitive flat league would be probably the best manager there is that you could have to set a team up for any given game, to restrict any given opposition, and especially in knockout football, in the cutthroat when the stakes are highest. I don't, down the years, there's probably never been anyone better at those big one-off scenarios.
We'll talk about the Carabao Cup final in just a few seconds, but touching on what you said there, do you think this will be Jose Mourinho's last job in the Premier League? Do you think his future now lies elsewhere? Say he doesn't make it to next season.
Possibly, because I thought his last job in the Premier League was Manchester United, and I didn't think he'd come back. I didn't think there was anywhere for him to go. I never thought his ego would cope with not being at the very, very top table again. So for him to come into a club, we're coming into a club and his remit might be to get into the top 4, and that's the expectation for Tottenham. But in his own head, his remit is to win the title or bust. And that's kind of what seems to be what he's done this season with Spurs. I don't see where he goes next. My assumption was he'll take time out. He'll probably come back with the Portuguese national team, try to win a World Cup and embellish that CV even further. But in terms of the Premier League, it is hard to see where he would go next after Tottenham, because then, how many clubs are there now that would appoint Jose Mourinho you're going further and further down the league. And I think it gets to a point where it gets a bit silly that, this guy with his CV in this past, how much money you're going to have to pay him to persuade him to then come and manage, to pluck a Newcastle or someone like that, to pluck a name out of the air.
Yeah, and no offense to clubs like Burnley or West Brom, but you probably don't really envisage him being at Turf Moor or the Hawthorns anytime soon, certainly not in the home dugout anyway. You've sort of stolen my thunder there by mentioning the Portuguese national team. I was going to ask you whether international football looks ideal for him, success in knockout and one-off matches and working on logistics. They'll have lots of time in between games to work on, the next set of fixtures and how he's going to approach each competition. And also, if he does want to take a bit of a step back and, take a breather from playing competitive football week in, week out, then surely going around and watching matches each and every weekend doesn't sound like too bad a role, does it?
I think international football would certainly suit Mourinho, yeah, because you think about the incentives and the most, it's not about money in international football. It's about if a player doesn't comply, then their brand's going to suffer. So it's almost like that medium ground's there between Mourinho and the player is like, well, listen, I'll just drop you. You'll not be in the team. It's not like you're not here for money. You're here for your country, and your brand will suffer if you're not part of this journey that we're on as a squad, as a team in this competition. You see what he's capable of in knockout football, especially. Any team that Jose Mourinho, if you put Jose Mourinho in charge of the Portuguese national side at a World Cup, I'd make them favourites. I can't see. You see the talent that Portugal's got, for example, in the next World Cup or the World Cup after that, and you've got to have them among the favourites. So yeah, I think that would potentially be not necessarily the only route left for him, but I think it would be the most intriguing one for his career. The whole Jose Mourinho storyline. If he's not just going to cash in and take the money, and we know, we see him wearing his big watches when he was on Sky Sports and all the brands and products that he was promoting. He's aware of the value of money and the value of what something's worth, and he's aware of his own value, and he's going to cash in on it as much as he can because he's a resources man. So that applies as much to his life as much as it applies to his Tottenham squad and what resources he's got and how to set up on a Saturday. This is just the way he thinks. It's logical resources, resourcefulness. So, he might just end up in the Middle East taking massive contracts, but I think the logical end for his storyline would be an international gig. And I think it would be absolutely fascinating to see him in that kind of context where it is more of a level playing field because, for the most part, players are selected by birthplace and by heritage and family roots and things like that.